research is something that we all do and all familiar with, but it's of course not the only area where human AI collaboration happens. But for me, it's a kind of way of demonstrating the specific kind of scenarios and kind of patterns that I'm talking about here, to test them in a specific context. Okay, and also there might be for some some implications. Okay, well, if you're doing research that involves AI, we'll have to document how AI was used. So there's that angle to using AI in research as well, just to plant the seed. Okay, a few words about myself. I'm located at Carleton University in Ottawa. That's between Toronto and Montreal. Originally, I'm from Germany, so I'll use any excuse to come to Europe. And I'm in a program called Technology and Innovation Management, or TIM, which is sort of a joint program between engineering and business, and kind of focuses on helping people with a technical background get into a kind of work with or either create or work for technology companies. So my background, I got my PhD in AI when it wasn't the sexy and hot topic that it was just today. And actually, I worked back then on kind of already on topics of human AI collaboration. That was kind of the most interesting part about it, rather than having autonomous agents doing stuff on their own. Then I had the privilege and chance to work in industry for a while, the telecom industry. That was my first job in Canada, on an agent-based communication system. So a new communication system that used agents. That was one of the first in that area. And then since 2000, I joined Carleton University, first in the computer science department. Then I went to engineering, and now I'm cross-affiliated between engineering and business. In terms of research, as you can see from the diagram down here, what essentially drives my interest is the idea of patterns. So patterns are ways of capturing design knowledge. Patterns, when you go beyond individual patterns, you create pattern languages that connect the patterns, and the pattern language is something you can use to systematically solve, well, first of all, capture and then solve design challenges. And I've applied this, researched several areas in which patterns played a key role to capture the key insights. One was the area of open source business. So the question was how to create business, how to make money with open source. We developed a bunch of, we actually started an open source project, commercialized it, and then that gave an opportunity to create document patterns on that. Then I was also very interested in the community aspect of that. And it's still that those two areas are still an area of interest to me. Then kind of more recently, I got back into human AI collaboration. Largely, this is driven by the fact that AI is a more relevant topic, and today, and in the technology management program, innovation management program, we focus on key technologies. So, a decade or two ago, that would have been open source. Then it was cybersecurity. Now it's AI. So I'm teaching, for example, a course on applying AI to digital transformation. Okay, so I use AI as the lens to which to understand digital transformation concretely. All right. That said, I'm also kind of, from a professional perspective, as an educator, interested in using AI in education. How can we use agents to, for example, allow goal-driven or project-specific learning, and to tailor the content to a particular need. And there's also a very interesting area that I think is getting increasingly important, dealing with misinformation in the context of climate change. And so the area of climate communication, how do we communicate effectively. I can't contribute in terms of climate research, but perhaps I can use, build agents or AI solutions to help with the communication. And that's also an area that students can do lots of interesting work. Just a few more words. We have kind of like a very diverse faculty, an equally diverse student body from many different countries, and that's a real pleasure to work with so many people. And there's lots of cross-fertilization. Main thing is here that the students have, as far as this talk is concerned, students have to work on a master's project in which they have to solve a problem for a real client. Okay, so it's problem-driven research. And so before I get into what I mean by research, just what is the talk about? What is it not about? So in this talk, I'm not going to talk about how AI is going to replace researchers or replace researchers with X. I'm not going to talk about how to use ChatGPT or Claude to write papers, or about the academic integrity, although I have written about that. It's a very interesting topic, but just beyond the scope, maybe we can talk about it in the question and answer period about that. But rather, it's about how kind of the introduction, how kind of human AI interaction, the collaboration between humans and AI is going to change research. Okay, so for that, I'm going through an envisioning exercise. So I'm identifying some key dimensions along which we can describe human AI interaction. And then I'm going to demonstrate how this can be done today, fully knowing that half a year from now we will do it completely differently, and that's okay. So it's just a snapshot of what we can do today. And thirdly, and that might be kind of maybe the most important takeaway in some ways, how's this going to change the role of researchers? And the point here is there are going to be multiple roles depending on the context that you're in. So this is not to say there's only one scenario how you can use AI. In fact, there are multiple different scenarios and depends on your context. And that's the key idea from patterns. Every solution depends on the context. Okay, but I do have to define what I mean by research. So there are two types generally acknowledged of knowledge production. And that's what research fundamentally is. Mode one is about working in a specific academic discipline and developing theories or testing theories. So you do surveys, hypotheses, you build prototypes, etc. Okay, you measure things. Mode two, on the other hand, is driven by practical problems. So there the goal is to develop generic solutions based on whatever knowledge you need. So what that means is the first mode one is focused on a single discipline. And mode two is transdisciplinary. You pick whatever is necessary to fix it, to solve your client's problem. Advance only once you dig into your problem. So to drill a little bit more into that, if I have a problem-solving project, what exactly is that? Well, it, I'm showing here, produces a solution to a client problem. It's driven by a statement of that problem, which you develop together with the client. The client might give you something initially, you form a dialogue with the client to come up with the precise problem statement, the focus for the project. The outcome is going to be measured by the performance. That doesn't mean how fast the system is, but how well you solve the client's problems. Okay? And what you also want, you want to develop some generalizable design knowledge from that you can then carry forward to similar projects or similar problems. So that would typically take the form of design principles. Okay, so that's the context in which I understand research here, because that's from my perspective particularly relevant to the students I deal with and the environment that I'm in. So, well, shouldn't put the slide up. What do you think are typical, what do you consider typical research activities? Just to make it a little bit more interactive. Well, you could use AI.
If you do a literature review.
Literature review, right? That's a great example, right? You can kind of scan papers, extract information from it, maybe even find the papers originally, right? But certainly organizing, right? Definitely. That would be typically your first stage. What would be another activity?
Implementation.
Implementation. What do you mean by that?
Well, typically software.
So you develop some kind of prototype in order to prove a point, right? So you want to demonstrate. You've come up with a solution, concept, and you want to prove that it works, right? And then the client can say, okay, yes, I want to go ahead with that, and now invest, time from my people to invest my own resources and money to develop this fully, right? And you can also measure a prototype, right? But building a prototype, you can then, but what if it's, yeah, go ahead.
I have a question. Since you also define research, also say what you exactly mean by AI.
Okay.
Use of AI here.
Okay, so good point. So I'm specifically focusing here on mainly generative AI, and so in current language, right, we drop the word AI model, we just say AI, we interact with AI, but that has to be understood that there's actually an AI model that we interact with. Now, I'm not limiting it to entirely to generative AI, that's just really the core focus, because AI has obviously been used before, like it has already many ways changed how we do things. So for example, think software engineering. Classical machine learning techniques are also about writing programs, by using training data, right? And then the learned model can react appropriately, right? Without you having to write code, right? So that's kind of okay. Scope that. Okay. So what are other activities? Well, so you talked about implementation, right?
Yeah, I think it's multiple activities. You design the problem statement,
yes.
Design research questions.
Exactly. Finding the research question, what do you want to do? What are you comparing it against? Collecting the data, then there was.
Yeah, and once you've done that, maybe sketch a solution and
sketch a solution, and then you kind of and then how you evaluate it, and how you do your data analysis and so on. Okay, exactly. So that's pretty much what I captured here, just maybe with some different examples. Okay, and so now I talked about AI, and before generative AI looked a bit different, right? And just to identify the context here is you use tools. There were obviously people are already using tools like topic modeling or simulation, etc. Right? So now the point is that these are very kind of tool specific. You need to know what topic models are, how it works, how to interpret it. That created technical barriers, and therefore the impact of the overall research process was somewhat limited. So maybe some people used it for topic modeling for literature reviews, but that was it, kind of, maybe analyzing interviews, but not as broadly. So generative AI is much more of a Swiss Army knife, for pretty much anything you want. To a degree, right? We're figuring that out, that it can't do everything, but it is a lot, in terms of the interface, a lot more amenable and more accessible. I think that's the key point. So if you look at a typical pre-generative AI scenario, say you have like 100 or 1,000 papers to review, and you would have gone to Web of Science, extracted the papers or the abstract. You would create a particular topic model, like an LDA topic model. You have to specify all kinds of parameters. You have to know what the topic model does and how it works. And then you get some output like this. Looks a bit cryptic, and then you have to kind of read between the lines what this might mean, okay? So this is changing, with large language models, right? And I think to me, some of the key drivers are that you have a natural language interface, but not just so a chatbot, but to tools and to data. You can talk to your tools and you can talk to your data. Okay. Second thing is there is at least some form of semantic representation in terms of embeddings, the vector space representation that underlies large language models. And it also gives it a form of reasoning. Reasoning is basically repeating, observed sequences that have worked in the past. It's not planning in the traditional sense, but what doesn't quite achieve that. And the third point I would like to say that left implicit here is that large language models made AI accessible to pretty much everyone. As long as, and maybe that's a big if, as long as you can communicate well, right? So it requires now a different skill set. And that already points to something I'm going to talk about more at the end of the talk, or maybe we can discuss during the Q&A, what are the new things that we need to be able to do in order to work well with these models. And one thing, these models have been trained on conversations, so they should inherently be good at collaboration. They have at least some sense of roles and interaction. Okay, so as I said, what I did, I kind of envisioned uses of how we can partner with AI. And I wanted to identify some key trends, and for example, autonomy, or initiative, and you can have low autonomy, high autonomy, low initiative, high autonomy, and then you have 2x2 or 4 scenarios based on that. So by autonomy, I refer to how much we delegate to the AI, how much we let the AI do independently. Okay, is it a small task or more complex task? And second, the initiative means whether the AI is reactive, most often, or is it proactive? Right? Does it act on its own? So that gives us 4 scenarios. And the first scenario down here, the instruction scenario, that's characterized by low autonomy and relatively low initiative. Why? That's basically the kind of standard scenario where we use a chatbot, we prompt it, we get answers. Now, why do I call it instruction? Well, because I have to have in my head all the steps of how my method works. I need to formulate the questions, and then I get answers to those questions. I can get some feedback on those on the points that I'm making. But it's all driven by the human researcher. Now, this is the mode that you use when you try to figure out things, when you don't yet have existing workflows or detailed steps how to do things. So it's a perfectly normal mode, okay? But we're probably going to do less of just instruction in the future. So one thing that is already used to a fair degree or to a certain degree is delegation. So when we delegate well understood sequence of steps or well understood tasks to AI agents. So not necessarily it could be a team of AI agents, but we delegate it to them. So for example, literature review might say, yeah, I think we can do a good chunk, or maybe create a first draft of a literature review. We know the steps, extract metadata, cluster it, extract themes, etc. Okay, so we can code that and let the agents do that for us. We still keep in control of the final results, but this is something we understand. We can now give it to agents. Over here in the assistance scenario, that's a high initiative, low autonomy scenario. Okay? That will be something like an agent observing, or a set of agents observing what you do, and interjecting with suggestions or feedback as you go. And you are entirely in control whether you accept it or not. Okay, it's just like a useful a colleague that's watching over your shoulder and helping you along. Like an agile programming would be you're the navigator, and is the other person monitoring, observing what you do. Right? You do pair programming. Up here, high autonomy and high initiative, I call that co-creation. At that point, humans and AI are partners. So you kind of you work in a dialogue with essentially a team of agents, and it could of course also include other humans. All right. So now let me just give an example for each one of them and talk about kind of how you could do this today. So here's a scenario. Suppose you have a researcher, talking to a paper or a book, and then you can ask questions, and the AI model give you some answers. Or you can go further. Maybe you can say, well, let me make an analogy or to a problem that I have. So, for example, this is what I use, the system that I'm going to build for my class, where we use a textbook or a book on applications of AI, and I allow students to talk to the book. I know that they typically don't read the book, so I wanted to find some incentive of making the knowledge in the book a little bit more accessible to them. So that's what I chose. But basically, they have a dialogue with the book. They drive it. They provide the instructions. I give them a set of patterns of how they can use it properly. So, for example, they could say, well, try to make an analogy. If you have a problem you want to solve, so I want to create, say the book talks about business models for AI. Okay, and the student has an idea for a business model that they can ask, okay, what about this type of business? How could I use AI? And then the bot will draw on the content of the book and provide that answer. And it will not just be driven by, what ChatGPT is or Claude has been trained on in general. Okay. So, I mean, of course, that's a well-known solution today, and it's ready to be implementable as a RAG system. So I just want to use that here as an opportunity to show kind of how I kind of think about represent the workflows here for these systems. So I have here a human in blue. I have an agent in orange or yellow, and green for tools. So the researcher asks the question, then the chatbot, in this case, that's really what the agent is at that point, searches the book content and then synthesizes an answer, okay? But I've described it as a workflow, and you have a research context. If you write a paper, you can probably use a workflow like that to document what you're doing, rather than, just a long narrative of how you're using AI. So the key point is here, the AI is reactive and it's relatively low autonomy. The human controls all the decisions, all the interpretations. The AI is strictly, in the kind of sparring partner, but not in a research partner, full research partner. In the assistance scenario, now we have an agent or a set of agents that are proactive. You offer help, such as, for example, you're writing on a paper, okay? And then the AI model might say, all right, you're making some pretty bold claims here. Can you give me some citations for that? Right? It might even give you such citations, okay? All right. And then as a researcher, you can accept or reject the suggestions. So, very simple realization of that would be, I'm, writing something here. I took a paragraph from one of my papers and left out all the citations, and the system dutifully went through all the statements and identified the claims that I made. Oh, you're talking about innovations or increasingly systemic. Can you tell me why you think so? Right? And then I might say, well, in this context, this is entirely obvious. AI, you got it wrong. Well, I can say, yeah, good point. I should add something. Okay, it's just a simple illustration of that concept. How would that work? Well, in this case, you have still one human, but you have multiple agents working together. So you have one agent that detects a change, what has changed, another agent that extracts the key statements or claims from what I've written, and the last agent that provides some feedback whatever I wanted the feedback on. For example, is this, does this, in this case, do these statements require support? Okay. So the key thing is AI is now proactive, but it's not taking over. It's not autonomous. Okay, fully autonomous. So the delegation scenario, here we go towards high autonomy, but no initiative. Okay, this is typically when you understand the set of a task, like doing a literature review. It's kind of, you pretty much understand the core of that. And we can let AI loose to create at least an initial literature review. So, most of us will probably have, like most of you, probably have, thousands or tens of thousands of papers in my download folder, and every day I get 10 more papers that I'm supposed to read. And so I let AI read, do an initial pass on the papers. And I'm extracting key information from the papers, such as, what problem does this paper solve? What's the solution approach? What's the method, and things like that, okay? So this information becomes then quite useful when I then want to know about a particular topic. And then I get, in this case, I have built an interface that gives me clusters of papers. It could be, you could do this in different ways. And then, for example, I could identify research questions that way. So I could say, okay, well, these are the research questions that have already been asked about my topic. That might trigger some questions I could, that are separate from, independent from that. So the interface that the user would see, again, I want to point out that you don't see any prompts here, right? This is all hidden in the interface, and I think that's also the future of using generative AI, not the way that we do mainly using it right now. So here, for example, I'm looking for papers of human agent interaction. It comes back with clusters of papers, based on the semantic similarity. And then, for example, this cluster here is about collaborative autonomy. And then below that, I get specific information about each of these papers. In this case, the problem statements from the papers. Okay, whatever you ask it to extract. So this involves kind of a two-pronged workflow. On the one hand, a process where we can get new papers, extract metadata from it, analyze the abstract, and in this case, extract the information that would be relevant for a problem-solving project, like the problem owner, the approach, etc. And then, as a researcher, I can then search for keywords, do a clustering analysis, and from papers that I found in the database. Okay. So the key thing here is the AI does operate independently here, but within boundaries. I'm saying do a literature review and don't do anything else. I'm defining very clear criteria, what I mean by metadata, and I've tested it separately and so on, right? To avoid any hallucinations or misinformation that I might generate. In the co-creation scenario, humans and AI share control. Okay, that's the idea. All right. So, for example, as a researcher, you might, now having found a research question from the previous stage, you might provide that research question and a set of, say, survey responses that you collect, that you gathered. All right. And you also provide a template, okay, of how to code these survey responses. Then the AI can be asked to code the survey, the responses, and then cluster them into themes. Okay, so that's kind of thematic analysis. And then the key thing here is that the researcher enters the game again. So for instance, they might say, okay, well, I don't think you got these two themes that are not really distinct from each other. I think we should combine them. Right? Or other kind of feedback until you're done, and then you say, well, can you please write up the theme, the descriptions of the themes, right? A possible this is kind of a possible system, how this would you see. Again, you see just the stages of the thematic analysis, codes extracted, themes identified, and now we're waiting for a review. So here, the system is asking me to give feedback on the themes that have been extracted by the AI agent, team of AI agents. And this now looks a little bit more complex, but not hugely complex. Two key things. One is that the human now involves in multiple places, so you have touch points where humans can interact and collaborate. And the second part is, instead of just kind of using prompts and doing this manually, which you could do, or doing it programmatically, you have some structure. You define agents that that do sub-steps, like for example, extracting the codes or identifying themes or defining the themes. And of course, you have this loop here where you iterate, based on the feedback. Okay, in this scenario, both AI and humans can initiate actions from the initiative dimension, and from the autonomy dimensions, the AI now operates independently, or a lot more independently, while this is also collaborative interaction, right? So I can override what the AI model does, I can provide feedback, I can steer it. Okay. Okay, what are the implications of all that? Well, one is that you can do things at scale. You become more efficient. I can read, 100 papers in a day if I needed to. Well, not really read it full, but I can do maybe the distant reading, and then I do the close reading on the 5 papers that come out in the end as the papers I should really be reading. It reduces my cognitive load on tedious tasks, like extracting certain information from documents, for example, or just the initial coding of responses that you got. And ultimately, it then also kind of frees up space for maybe doing things differently that you in the past you were just limited by, all the manual work involved, and so you can. I think we're kind of perhaps just limited by, by how we currently think of our research methods. One thing that we know is that we probably have to change how we teach research once we, use AI. But the thing I want to draw your attention to is that the role of the researcher also changes. So for each of the 4 scenarios, there's a new role. So in the instruction scenario up here, the human is essentially a craftsperson. I think that term describes it well. Basically, someone who knows methods, who knows how to use tools skillfully. Okay, which makes all the difference when you use a chatbot, right? Some people are getting great results, others are getting very poor results. They just cut and paste. Okay. The second role associated with the assistant scenario is the human becomes a curator. So the AI agents select and organize information. So the role, AI agents, make suggestions, provide feedback, collect useful bits of information along the way while you're working, and then as a curator, you select and organize this information in a way that's meaningful to you. For a well-understood task in the delegation scenario, you essentially become a conductor. So you conduct a team of agents. So not only do you instruct individual agents, but you also need to be concerned about or define how these agents interact and coordinate. And lastly, in the co-creation scenario, you become a collaborator. So as a collaborator, you really work as part of a team of agents. So imagine, like software development using an agile approach, where some of the roles, maybe the Scrum Master, maybe individual developers, are agents. Okay, and they follow patterns like the patterns described in the Scrum book. and other known patterns of how to do Scrum. Okay, that's entirely possible. I mean, I've seen people using that in their courses now as a way of kind of teaching how we can use AI in software development in a smart way. Okay. And now this is going, of course, with new roles that also come new challenges, right? So one challenge, and I think we've known this from the beginning of at least once ChatGPT was introduced, and that's, I think, where perhaps a lot of the concerns are from over-reliance, that we might become over-reliant on AI and therefore also kind of de-skill. So we lose skills that we used to have. And one of, critical thinking, for example, is probably perhaps the most important skill that we need to preserve. Another challenge is if you use AI in your research and AI makes some of the contributions, do you own those contributions? I'm not talking about copyright here. I'm talking about the psychological ownership of those contributions, and of course also the ownership that you need to defend when you submit a paper. And what are you going to say to the journal editor? Well, AI did this. Well, you need to be very precise about what AI did and what you did, right? So what exactly counts as a contribution becomes a relevant question to ask. There are going to be new skills and competencies. One is the emphasis on critical thinking, but there are others. And we also need to develop mechanisms to allow us to trust the output of agents. So if you just have a single prompt, write a paper for me, I don't expect any of you would trust the outcome. It reads well, but if you know the domain, you probably realize it's not a good paper. But if I ask an agent and I give it precise instructions and criteria to to extract metadata from an abstract, that's pretty doable. It's very well bounded. Okay. So I think one way of achieving trust here is kind of to take kind of this, what I would call a micro agent approach, where you build small agents that do dedicated tasks, and you could have a whole library of them that you can reuse. And then, of course, there are ethical considerations, from bias to use of training data from other people and all that. Now, what are some new skills? One is you want people, and if you're thinking of students, want them to be AI literate. So you need to understand both what AI can do and what it cannot do. And since the models in themselves were black boxes, that doesn't help. So you have to be try to bound what the model does. So using the idea from domain-driven development of a bounded context is one way that can help here. Critical thinking is important for evaluating the output that AI produces. Orchestration is another skill. By orchestration here, I mean to organize or to conduct a team of agents. Prompting, on the other hand, I think is going to be less important. Why? Prompting is hidden inside the agents. Assuming that the agents are, that you have a library of agents, not everybody would have to program their own agents. Okay? So this is rather becoming more of a low-level skill as compared to today. And ethical thinking has to become part of the toolkit. So what are the key takeaways? I think I have 3, and then I have added 3 more as kind of follow-ups on that. So the first one, I was not talking about AI versus humans or AI replacing researchers, but how we can work well with AI as a partner. The second takeaway is that I went to the exercise of envisioning scenarios for using AI, or human AI collaboration, and applying it to different research tasks to demonstrate the feasibility. And thirdly, perhaps most importantly, the role of researchers changes and the skills required changes. And that doesn't just mean us, this means what we teach. Okay. So research methods course, I believe, has to be taught differently than in the past. There are some other, I think, useful observations that came out of this exercise. One is that workflows like the one I showed, and you can obviously use other workflow representations, are a good way of documenting how AI was used in your research. In the appendix of your paper, it could be, this is my workflow that I use. Currently, you have prompts and some examples, and that's pretty much impossible to replicate. This might be more replicable. Secondly, I think, I think this is a general observation. I've kind of seen that in the past, but we kind of come back full circle. Typically, when people write agents today using generative AI, they're big, fat, single agents. Okay, everything in one prompt, and it can make it a huge laundry list of things to do. There are many practical reasons why this doesn't work well in general. And it's generally a much better idea to break these large agents into smaller agents. So there's a trend towards, I call it micro agents, kind of similar to microservices. And of course, you can test them separately. You can kind of bound them very clearly. You give them a very focused context and all those things. And lastly, one thing that I'm doing, and other people, I've seen other people do that, started to do that now, is to kind of, we need to measure the productivity impact. We can't just claim this is improving our productivity. We need to have some, ways of maybe either through analyzing self-reports or maybe using human brain interfaces to observe people as they use AIs, so these AI applications like this, how much the performance actually improves. That's pretty much what I wanted to say. Thank you for the opportunity, and please, if you have any questions.